This was a fairly lengthy process, and what I would indicate is that in recent years, we have learned that the use of body cameras is really helpful. It just speeds up the process, and one of the reasons is they're designed to record and provide an accountability tool for the police officers. And it works both ways. If they've done something wrong, that can be picked up and it can be examined and determined whether they did something wrong. And if they haven't done anything wrong, it can be used to exonerate their actions as well. What took some time on this one is that we didn't have that in this case. What we really had to rely on were statements of witnesses, the evidence that was collected, and some footage from video cameras that were in the squads themselves. Because this was a foot chase and it occurred some distance away from the squad cars, it took us some time to try to enhance those images, to put together the different segments so that we had a good understanding of what took place. After doing all of that, I came to the conclusion that I would not be able to sustain my burden on charging Officer Mensa with a homicide in this case.
And why specifically did you reach that conclusion?
Well, the evidence showed that Mr. Cole was in fact armed with a firearm when he went to Mayfair Mall. He was involved in a disturbance with one of the patrons there. When he was confronted by the police officers, he ran, and during that chase, the firearm was actually discharged. Once he went to the ground, the officers indicated that he never surrendered that firearm. And because of that, the way officers are trained is they're trained that they are authorized to use deadly force if a person has a weapon, they have a means of delivery, and they demonstrate any kind of intent to use that weapon. And in this circumstances, the officer said that Mr. Cole actually retained possession of the weapon through the entire incident and at some point was pointing it in their direction. Based on all of that information, I determined that that no reasonable jury would convict Officer Mensa because he has a right to self-defense just like any other citizen has a right to.
Alvin Cole's mom spoke to the crowd outside after she met with you, and she said that you said that you could not justify the shooting.
Yeah, so this is where you get into legalese to a certain extent, and justification or privilege is the legal term. In other words, you are privileged to use deadly force if you believe, under the circumstances, that you face an imminent risk of death or great bodily harm. And police officers in particular are allowed to make that determination based on their training and also whether they subjectively believe that the person poses a risk of death or great bodily harm, and whether that's objectively reasonable. That's the assessment that you do. And so oftentimes with police officers, you have to look at the training and whether they complied with that training in making the decision. If they did, and they were actually confronted with a firearm, which almost by nature is a deadly weapon capable of causing great bodily harm or death, they're generally going to have the benefit of the doubt in their decision to use force or not.
But you still don't think that it was justified? I'm kind of confused about that.
So yeah, so what in saying that, what that means is that I would never be able to overcome my burden, which is to actually disprove that the self-defense wasn't legitimate. So in essence, yes, then some people would call that justification. What I say is that my obligation is to overcome beyond a reasonable doubt that he wasn't legally privileged to use force in that circumstance.
So, but do you think he should have shot in that situation?
You see, I don't answer the question of whether they should or shouldn't, right? I have to answer the question of, under the circumstances, was it legally appropriate?
And at this point, you're saying it was?
I am.